Faraway Wanderers. Chapter 49, Long K. By his features, the man appeared to be about 30 years of age. He was a cripple. His forelimbs had shrunk to the point that they looked like those of a child, and the skin of his exposed forearm was so wrinkled, it seemed shriveled up. His head was disproportionately huge and his neck was tilted to the side as if he couldn't hold it upright. Seated in a wooden wheelchair, he made a nearly inhuman, gruesome sight. Slowly, the man rolled his mobile seat into the hall. Yabai frowned as he stared at the approaching man. "You're not Long K," he said. The Lord of the Puppets Manor had become a Jianghu legend some 30 years ago. The real Long K could not be this young. The man in the wheelchair emitted a shrill laugh. "Of course, I'm not." The man's eyes were enormous. Wen Kexing leaned towards Zhou Zishu and whispered, "Look at those eyes. Don't they look like they're about to fall out from their sockets?" Zhou Zishu inwardly remarked on how inane Wen Kexing was. It was as if wherever he went, he had to say something pointless to recoup his travel expenses. Hence, he ignored him. The man in the wheelchair spoke again in his piercing voice. "And who are you lot to dare intrude on the puppet's manor?" The more he observed him, the more Yabai found this person unpleasant. He didn't look like someone trustworthy at all. Forcing himself to be patient with great difficulty, he spoke in an appropriate tone of voice, "I've come to see Long K. We need to discuss something." By Yabai's standards, he had indeed spoken rather courteously. Yet everyone else still heard him speak with the same unpleasantly stiff and arrogant manner. The man in the wheelchair turned his head around. His enormous eyes shifted up and down as he gauged Yabai before he snorted. "Long K, that old goat, has long since turned into a pile of decomposing bones. What business can you have with him?" The crease between Yabai's brows deepened. "Long K is dead," he asked. "How did he die?" That person in on the wheelchair said smugly, "I killed him, of course." The outrageous statement stunned everybody present. Between Zhou Zishu, Wen Kexing, and Yabai, the three of them had quite some skills. Yet, they still had ended up battered by the puppet's manor, almost dying in the process as they joined forces to break in. How did someone who couldn't even walk manage to find his way into the manor? To say nothing of killing its lord. Yabai clearly had never heard of the word tact. He glowered at the man in the wheelchair. "Bullshit. If you can kill Long K, then a slug can cut down a tree. Preposterous. Unless you're his son and he lay down to let you chop him up as you please." Upon hearing this, Wen Kexing knew that things were going to get worse, and immediately said to Zhang Chengling, "Get out, quick." The echo of his voice was yet to dissipate when the fellow in the wheelchair's furious bellow thundered in the room, "You're seeking your own death." With that, the crippled fellow slammed his hand on the armrest of his wheelchair, and rows upon rows of human-shaped silhouettes emerged from the walls all around. Bald and faceless, a dozen of the summoned puppets pounced towards their little group at once. Zhang Chengling was running to the exit as instructed. He didn't manage to avoid and crashed straight into a puppet. That puppet was rather impolite, it raised its arm to crack his skull open right away. Zhou Zishu flicked his finger, hitting Zhang Chengling at the back of his knee so that he collapsed to the ground with a thud and made him barely dodge the attack. Zhang Chengling scrambled back post-haste. He peered at their surroundings with his mouth hanging open in bewilderment. "Chifu, is this hell?" he asked. Zhou Zishu sighed, reflecting that he would probably remain a stranger to the expression "being coddled" his whole life. He wrenched himself from Wen Kexing's grasp and yanked Zhang Chengling closer. Then he turned to stand back to back with the other man, keeping the boy between them. "These puppets are tough and can't die," he whispered to Wen Kexing. "But they still present some advantages." "Advantages?" Wen Kexing repeated. "Yes. For one, they can't jump, and for another, they are quite stupid." As Zhou Zishu spoke, two puppets attacked them from different sides. When Kexing grabbed Zhang Chengling and acted as if he had read Zhou Zishu's mind, they both leapt in opposite directions at the same time. Having lost their targets, the two puppets crashed into one another, tumbling to the floor in a tangle of mechanical limbs. Wen Kexing took a glance at them and giggled obnoxiously. "The way they are going at it," he said while covering Zhang Qingling's eyes with his hand, "it's like watching erotic pictures, but in motions." On Zhou Zishu's end, as soon as he landed back on the floor, another puppet swung its huge club at his head. Zhou Zishu dodged with a front flip, but he felt as if a column of fire had ignited from his lungs to his throat. With great effort, he forced himself not to cough as he suspected that he'd be spitting blood again. The puppet missed his strike and continued pursuing Zhou Zishu in dissatisfaction. It swept its club at his chest and Zhou Zishu bent backwards at the waist to avoid the blow. Spying the movement, Wen Kexing sighed, "Such a flexible waist." Before the puppet could deliver its third strike, Zhou Zishu flung Zhang Chengling across the room. As he hurtled through the air, the terrified boy flopped his forelimbs like a giant toad experiencing muscle spasm. Wen Kexing saw that move, spoke up and reminded him, "What happened to the sword patterns I've taught you? Did you eat them with breakfast?" he sniped. Zhang Chengling went and haphazardly threw himself on the puppet that was closing in on Zhou Zishu. Landing from above, the managed to cause that puppet to lose its balance and both the boy and the puppet toppled together. He jumped to his feet hastily, rubbing at where his ass hurt from falling on it and asked, flustered from panic, "Senior, which move should I use?" Zhou Zishu, who was taking he chance to catch his breath, grabbed Zhang Chengling by the collar and threw him at Wen Kexing. "You coming here to add more trouble is the last thing I need," he grumbled. For the three of them who were merely implicated in this trouble, the situation was not as bad as with Ye Bai, who had directly offended the master of this place with his rude words. A dense swarm of human puppets surrounded him, clustering so tightly around him that water could hardly squeeze through the gaps between them. However, this old man was even more stubborn in old age and determined to go toe-to-toe with those puppets. It was erect over his side, as lively as a New Year's celebration. Zhou Zishu pressed his fist against his chest and swallowed down a mouthful of cloying blood that had welled up within his throat. "We won't last long like this," he said to the approaching Wen Kexing. "Who knows how many more puppets there are in this god-forsaken place?" "The place is called Puppet Manor," Wen Kexing replied. "I'd say that man on the chair is the only living being here. The rest are all marionettes." Zhou Zishu narrowed his eyes. "Makes sense," he replied. "He's the only one we can kill." They glanced at each other with identical evil glints in their eyes and acted in a well-coordinated manner even without discussion. Once again, Wen Kexing seized Zhang Chengling and flung him out as if he were Gao Shanu's meteor hammer. Zhang Chengling screeched like a banshee as he flattened another puppet upon landing, and Zhou Zishu leapt toward him, picking him up before the fallen puppet could beat him to death with its elbow. Then, immediately after tossing Zhang Chengling aside, Zhou Zishu tapped the floor with the tip of his shoe and surged up like a sparrow taking flight in the direction of the person in the wheelchair. "Another one seeking death," the latter scoffed. With that, the crippled man leaned back into his seat, and a dozen metal chains with spears attached to their ends flew out from the bottom of his wooden wheelchair. They hurtled at Zhou Zishu from every direction. Zhou Zishu drew in a sharp breath and used the 1,000-pound plunge to dive towards the ground. With a quick slide of his feet, he found his way behind a human puppet's back in a flash. One of the chains barely missed him and crashed right into the puppet, its blade bending in the opposite direction as its length of metal links wrapped the human puppet up like a dumpling. Note: same technique as the one used against the giant dog in the cave. Zhou Zishu flicked his long sleeves with a jerk of his arms. "Did you think I wouldn't use concealed weapons?" he called out. The strange man in the wheelchair gave a start and immediately slammed his hand on his armrest. A metal umbrella suddenly sprung out horizontally in front of him. But then, seconds elapsed, and nothing happened. This dirty trick of scaring people is something Zhou Zishu had learned from Goose Yang. Under these circumstances, he couldn't care about his expert status nor whether it was gentlemanly to do so. It's handy, so he used it right here. Discovering that he had fallen for the trick, that strange person was humiliated and got only more furious. He made the metal umbrella retract, but when he looked up again, Joe's issue had already vanished. Putting Yabai aside, he scanned the surrounding, only to hear someone jeer at him from the ceiling. "Hey, idiot. Do you really take everything handed to you at face value?" The odd man looked up to the sight of Wen Kexing descending towards him. He was brandishing a large club he had taken from one of the fallen puppets and was aiming straight at his head. The strange man immediately activated another mechanism, and an explosive sphere launched from his wheelchair. Wen Kexing cursed under his breath at meeting his old nemesis again. Not paying mind to where he aimed, he hastily swung his club at the sphere-shaped projectile and sent it flying away. Yabai's angry roar was heard the next second. "Wen, you little piece of shit, do you have a death wish?" Wen Kexing flipped through the air and, upon landing, he turned to the sight of Yabai's disheveled appearance with his face covered in soot. He was overjoyed. Turning his head, he hollered at that person in the wheelchair, "Quick, give me another exploding ball." At that, the person in the wheelchair gets so enraged that smoke seemed to come out of his ears. But before he could do anything about it, a faint whistling noise sounded by his ear. When he turned his head around, a sword that shone coldly was flying toward his throat. Conscious of the danger, he did not dare take any chances. The crippled person opened the metal umbrella from his wheelchair again and made to escape from the hall. In the next instant, however, he froze on the spot. His uncommonly large eyes grew yet bigger as he glanced downward in utter disbelief. He hadn't predicted that his opponent's weapon was a flexible sword, one that could bend at the wielder's will. This would be his very last thought, as Bai had pierced his throat. Though he had achieved his target with a single strike, Joe's issue did not linger. Hearing the commotion, he knew that puppets were charging at him from behind. He flew up into the air and leapt over the wooden wheelchair without even glancing back. Met with an obstacle, the puppets swung their clubs, splintering that amazing wooden wheelchair that was blocking their way into pieces. Gears littered the floor. Then, as if they had been frozen with a spell, every puppet in the room came to an abrupt halt. Shaky from the effort he had exerted, Joe's issue stumbled upon landing. Wen Kexing, who had been lying in wait, readily reached out to catch him. Then, tilting his head to the side, he planted a kiss on Joe's issue's cheek. "Splendid sword technique," he exclaimed in admiration. Joe's issue wiped at his face as if ridding himself of dog saliva and shoved Wen Kexing away. "Splendidly sleazy of you," he exclaimed in consternation. With a dark expression on his face, Yabai picked up Zhang Chengling from the floor where he had sprawled himself after tripping on a fallen puppet, and strode towards the other two. Without a word, he aimed a punch at Wen Kexing. As Wen Kexing evaded the blow, he said, "Ayo, venerable elder. Why are you splitting hairs with a junior over these trivial things?" He was grinning as he continued to dodge. Joe's issue sighed at them. Exhausted, he flopped down to sit on the back of a fallen puppet. After hacking a few coughs, he said, "Give it a rest, both of you. Say, venerable elder who is definitively not a rice tub, how about using your amazing skills to have a look at the mechanisms over here instead? So, you can come up with a way to get us out of this place." Yabai cast a sidelong glance toward the disintegrated wheelchair. "Come up with a way, my foot," he replied. "You've already smashed the thing into pieces." With that, he turned around and strode toward the hole in the wall from which the strange man in the wheelchair had come from. Zhang Chengling hurried towards Joe's issue. "Shifu, are you all right?" he asked in a small voice. This child had been swung around multiple times like a piece of rock by both men, and yet he did not appear to be resentful at all. The only thing he cared about was his Shifu's condition. Under his innocent and worried gaze, Joe's issue felt a little like a scumbag. He therefore responded in a rare display of gentleness, "I'm fine." Nothing's the matter. Jiang Chenling turned around and crouched down with his back to Zhou Zishu. Shifu, he said. Let me carry you. Zhou Zishu didn't know whether he should laugh or cry. He patted the boy on the shoulder as he got up by himself. That's enough, he said. I'm not expecting you do so. He hadn't made it 2 steps when Wen Kexing approached in turn. Wen Kexing didn't allow him any chance to protest and grabbed him by the waist and drew him close. Inwardly thinking that this man had not gotten his fill of taking advantage of him, Zhou Zishu was about to elbow him in the ribs when Wen Kexing jeered at him. Save your energy. If that old glutton messes up with the mechanisms, you'll still be expected to fight later on. Zhou Zishu mulled it over and concluded that the guy wasn't wrong. Thus, he let himself lean against Wen Kexing. Only then, as he let go, did he find that his body felt like it was ready to fall apart. He nearly failed to draw in his next breath. At that moment, they heard Ye Bai called out, "Come over here, all of you." The 3 of them made their way through the hole in the wall. Within it, there was something else that had been entirely hidden. Dense and complex lines that sketched out the map to the puppet's manor covered an entire wall. Dumbstruck, Wen Kexing raised his head to scrutinize the peculiar sight. Even if you gave that to me, he said after a long while. I couldn't make sense of it. What a relief, me neither, Zhou Zishu said with a large grin. Ye Bai stared at the pair, rendered speechless at long last. He turned to Jiang Chenling. Come with me. Jiang Chenling hurriedly followed him only to see Ye Bai fiddle with the wall where the map was. The mysterious tinkering went on for a while before, suddenly, the wall parted in its middle, revealing the various mechanism inside that would make most gasp in wonderment. Zhou Zishu tilted his head back and gazed at it, sighing. The person who built the puppet's manor is quite an extraordinary man, he said. Jiang Chenling was assisting Ye Bai in tinkering the mechanism. The old man and the young boy worked and puzzled over it. Finally, after a long period of time, they heard a massive rumbling noise. The ceiling itself along with another face of the wall, split open. A flight of stairs came into sight. The 4 of them went over and climbed up with caution. None of them could have said how long their ascension lasted, but they ultimately re-emerged above ground. There was wind, there was sun, and there were plants. They had arrived in a small decent courtyard. This would be the actual puppet manor, Ye Bai said. The man in white surveyed the surrounding before he strode off towards a small pavilion, the door of which had been blocked off with iron bars. Erected under a gigantic tree, the shaded building had an eerie sense of gloominess to it, its tightly sealed door and windows making it look like a prison. Ye Bai channeled energy into his palm and tore down the metal fence. Then, he pushed the door open and walked in with the confidence bestowed upon those who were secure in their skills. The 3 others followed a step behind. However, they soon all froze on the spot. In that small prison lay a bed upon which someone had been tied down with thick iron chains. It was an old man with a head full of white hair who looked around with sightless eyes, doubtless rendered blind from remaining in a dark chamber for too long. Upon hearing the commotion, the old man turned his head towards the door whilst a shudder jostled his emaciated body. Silence stretched before Ye Bai asked, "Are you Long Ke?" End chapter. Faraway Wanderers. Chapter 50, The Key. The old man turned his ear toward them while a nervous shudder made his limbs twitch, the metal chains on his body clanging with his every movement. Jiang Chenling gave Zhou Zishu's robe a furtive tug. "Shifu, those chains, do they go through his shoulder blades?" "Shush," Zhou Zishu uttered in reply, his brows knitting as he looked over. The chains weren't merely tied around the old man's body, they also pierced both his shoulders and kneecaps. The flesh around the wounds had rotted away, leaving only exposed bones. Zhou Zishu reflected that to keep on living like this was no small feat. An overwhelming stench lingered in the darkened room. It came from the urine and faces strewn everywhere. The old man's clothes had lost their original colors long ago, they barely covered him. He truly made a ghastly sight. When he spoke, the old man's diction was slow and hesitant, as if he had not talked for a long time. "You, who are you?" he asked in a gravelly voice. "Where's Long? Long Xiao? Is Long Xiao a cripple who moves around in a wheelchair?" Ye Bai inquired. "If so, he's dead. Who was he to you?" Upon hearing that, the old man was stunned for a long while. Then, he opened his mouth wide while an expression of joy seemed to creep across his face. But no sound came out of his parted lips. His eyes filled with murky tears, they slid down his face, vanishing from view in a split second. Ye Bai ignored him. He merely squatted down to examine the iron chains on him and let him laugh and cry intermittently like a lunatic. A good while later, he extended his hand toward Zhou Zishu. "Lend me your sword," he said. Zhou Zishu understood that the man in white intended to cut through the chains. Thus, he unsheathed Bai and handed it over. Ye Bai promptly hacked at a length of chain. There was a resounding clang, but the shackle didn't even budge. There wasn't even a dent in it. Zhou Zishu's sword, however, vibrated from the shock. Zhou Zishu's heart ached just from looking at it. Don't waste your energy. It's no use," the old man said. "What abominable sin did you commit for that cripple to hate you so?" Ye Bai asked in reply. The old man remained silent for a moment. Then, he said, "The only sin I've committed was to raise a son like him." At that, the few of them stared at each other. They realized then why Long Xiao had worked up such a temper after Ye Bai told him, "Unless you're Long Q's son." The old glutton was practically a divinity with the way he had been accidentally right about such an implausible relations. Wen Kexing broke the hush that had fallen by saying, "When you say Long Xiao," he said, "you don't mean Xiao as in the character for filial piety, do you?" Feeling that Wen Kexing was truly prodding at sore spots, Zhou Zishu jabbed him with his elbow. Wen Kexing didn't dare dodge, he received the jab full on and rubbed at his ribs with a pitiful expression on his face. The old man gave a hoarse chortle. "It must be karmic retribution for terrible crimes I've committed in a previous life," he said as reached for the bedpost with his leathery hand and struggled to lean against it. "And this is the very chamber in which that little ingrate was born," he went on, the flow of his speech growing more fluent after speaking for a while. "It was mine and Yuzui's bedroom back then. To think that both my wife and I would die by his hands. Ha! If that's not fate, what is? Was Yuzui your esteemed wife?" Zhou Zishu asked in a gentle voice. The old man's face was so wrinkled that it was impossible to tell whether it had been ugly or handsome. It was hard to tell whether his expression was one of joy or sorrow. At the name Yuzui, however, the deep furrows gouging his cheeks seemed to relax. A teardrop caught in the crease beside his mouth, it trembled on the verge of sliding down. "Yes. She passed away giving birth to that child. I built the puppet's manor after she was gone, and dismissed all the servants." At that, Zhang Chenling cast a stunned glance at Wen Kexing. He was finding the senior Wen even more incredible because he had been right even about this. The old man continued. "I promised Yuzui that I would raise the little ingrate, but he was born a cripple who couldn't walk on his own. So, I taught him everything I knew, from the beginning to the end, thinking that at least it would allow him to support himself." "Ha! If that's the case," Ye Bai said, "why did he imprison you?" The old man's whole body trembled. "He did it for the yin-yang manual," he said after a long pause. Zhang Chenling aside, all three men's gazes sharpened at that. They peered at the old man unblinkingly. Zhou Zishu was the first one to breach the subject. "Do you mean, the yin-yang manual that belonged to Lady Wrong?" he asked in a soft tone. The old man nodded and said slowly, "New fresh regrows on dead bones, as yin and yang are reversed. There was no intractable disease in the world that the legendary artifact of the Divine Medicine Valley could not treat. Even the green vixen sought it hoping that it would heal her face, Who else would desire the ancient tome more than an ambitious man who had been born a cripple? Zhou Zishu thought quickly and asked. Wasn't the yin-yang manual sealed within the lapis armor together with the Fengshan sword manual and the 6 harmonies cultivation mantra from the very start? Do you mean to say that your son thought you were in the possession of the lapis armor? The lapis armor? The old man sneered and shook his head. You are wrong, all of you. I forged the armor myself, back then, but it's only a lock. Even if you had them, its 5 fragments would be useless on their own. If you want to obtain the treasures sealed within, you'd still need a key. Do you have that key, then? Ye Bai asked with a raised brow. I don't have it, the old man said in a staid voice. If you don't have it, whose hands can it be in? Ye Bai pressed on. The old man smiled self-mockingly. Of course, you wouldn't believe me. He didn't either. Zhou Zishu scrutinized the old man. After a long moment, he abruptly asked, Senior Long, you do know who has the key, don't you? The old man turned his head toward Zhou Zishu, appearing as if he could actually see him. He nodded his head. You are right. I do know. But, all those years ago, I took an oath to never reveal the whereabouts of that key to no one. Long Xiao. Long Xiao went mad because of it? Ye Bai narrowed his eyes. Which means that you also know, he said, his tone growing outright threatening, the truth about what happened between Rongxian and the others 30 years ago, don't you? The old man silently nodded again. But before Ye Bai could continue questioning him, he said, I can't tell you, though. Rongxian and his wife were my benefactors, they saved my life. I promised Lady Rong that I wouldn't tell, so I can't. Well, that's not up to you, is it? Ye Bai replied in an icy tone. The old man laughed out loud at that. He moved his leg over with strenuous effort. Feeling around for the metal chain that had been pierced through his kneecap, he lifted it for Ye Bai to see and continued to make light of it. What else can you do to me? Long Xiao, that little ingrate has already kept me captive for 3 years. What else can you do to me? The old man, for whom even breathing seemed a chore, leaned against the bedpost with a faint mocking smile curled at the corner of his lips. He seemed to not give a damn about the world. As Zhou Zishu observed him, he was suddenly reminded of the quote from the General Fan Kui, I am not afraid of even death, why would I refuse a mere cup of wine? He couldn't help but wonder at what kind of person Long Ke was. A man of astounding skills, he had forsaken the world and built the eerie and perilous Puppets Manor because of a single person. Then, because of a single promise to keep a secret, he had spent 30 years of living purgatory on earth while even his own son couldn't loosen his lips. Zhou Zishu reflected that, in the entire Jianghu, there was perhaps not a single person more deserving of the title hero than the dying old man in front of him. At that moment, Wen Kexing's arm suddenly tightened around Zhou Zishu's waist, to the point it seemed he was trying to melt Zhou Zishu's body into his own. Turning to look at him, he found Wen Kexing was staring fixedly at Long Ke. There wasn't a trace of his usual grin remained on his face and, for a second, Zhou Zishu thought he saw a glint of moisture in those dark eyes of his. But then, it flashed by and vanished in the next instant. Hey, old freak, Wen Kexing hollered at Ye Bai. Since he doesn't want to tell, just leave him alone, won't you? Stop asking for people to dislike you. Ye Bai ignored him entirely. He grabbed the old man's arm and spoke in an icy voice. I have no interest in the lapis armor, or the key, or whatever. The only thing I want to know is the truth about how Rongxian and his wife died. Do you know anything about that? His grip was forceful enough that bruises formed on the back of the old man's hand. A pained expression surfaced on Long Q's face, yet he still kept saying, I don't. Wen Kexing scowled. He released Zhou Zishu and handed him over to Zhang Chenling. For some unclear reason, he snapped at Ye Bai in anger, old freak, do you plan on shutting it anytime soon? Then without prior warning, he struck at Ye Bai's back. As he propped Zhou Zishu up, Zhang Chenling gaped, dumbfounded, at Wen Kexing and Ye Bai, who were brawling in a dizzying whirl of motion. He couldn't at all fathom why people who had been comrades in arms only a moment ago were suddenly fallen out with each other. The commotion those two worked up was way shy of being discreet. Soon, the room that had imprisoned Long Ke for so many years was shaken to its foundations as they went at each other with the force that could demolish a house. Wen Kexing was not holding back anything at all, as each of his blows was more vicious than the last. "Little prick, what are you playing at?" Ye Bai snarled in fury. Wen Kexing sneered. "You're an eyesore and I want to beat you up." Problem. Used to asking whenever he didn't understand something, Zhang Chenling turned to Zhou Zishu. "Shifu." Zhou Zishu ignored the boy. With his brows knitted, he was deep in thought. The outline of an idea was emerging in his mind. Then, it snapped into place in an epiphany. He pushed Zhang Chenling aside, walked up to Long Qu's side, and sat down. "You're wounded?" the old man asked after listening to Zhou Zishu's breathing for a few seconds. "Your son's doing," Zhou Zishu answered. Long Ke laughed. "Come off it," he croaked in his gravelly voice. "Look at me, you're still better off." Zhou Zishu didn't reply and scrutinized the metal chains on the old man's body. When it came to traps and mechanisms, Zhou Zishu was essentially inept. When it came to instruments of torture, however, none were more familiar with them than the former leader of Tianchuang. Yet, he still couldn't figure out what material these metal chains were made of. After a few more minutes with no better clue, he gave up his examination and turned to Long Ke. "There is nothing I can do to unfasten those chains," he said. "Now that your son is dead, what's going to happen to you?" Long Ke thought it over before he spoke in a calm voice. "I think it's time for me to die too. Actually, I should have died a long time ago, but he didn't allow it. No one is left to thwart me now. In my whole life, I have only one regret, that of not having done right by Yuzui's son. I knew he was my son too, yet I couldn't help resenting him for taking my wife's life. If in all those years, I had been a half-decent father to him, he wouldn't have turned out like he did." Zhou Zishu thought those words rang true and didn't know how to offer comfort. In the end, he opted for frankness. "You're probably right," he said. By this point, Ye Bai and Wen Kexing had managed to tear down the roof for real. The both of them leapt outside to continue their fight, and the dark chamber was bathed in light all of a sudden. Long Ke seemingly felt the sun against his skin. He reached out a trembling hand as if to grab it and sighed in contentment. Zhou Zishu was about to speak when Ye Bai's angry bellow thundered from outside. "Little brat, stop sticking your nose in business that doesn't concern you. Long Ke, I'll have you tell the truth about what happened to Rongxian no matter what. He was my disciple." Upon hearing that roar, even Long Ke gave pause, whereas Wen Kexing froze in mid-air with one leg outstretched. Holding that ridiculously pose, he regarded Ye Bai with an odd expression on his face. Indeed, Rongxian and Long Ke were of the same generation, so if Ye Bai was Rongxian's Shifu, was this Ye person really as immortal as the fabled 1,000-years-old sea turtles? Ye Bai glared daggers at Wen Kexing before he returned inside. He stood by the bed and addressed the old man while looking down his nose at him. "Back then, Rongxian stole the 6 harmonies cultivation mantra from me, left the mountain and never returned. Today, because of what he has left behind, the pugilist world of the Central Plains has invoked the realm's command. Do I not deserve to know what had happened all those years ago?" "You are Yet?" Long Ke asked. "Yes, I'm Ye Bai." Long Ke drew in a deep breath and shook his head while giving a sigh. "Venerable elder, I wouldn't have dreamed that you were still alive." An elderly person whose hair and whiskers were entirely white was addressing a person with a young man's face as venerable elder. "This scene is extremely uncanny." Zhou Zishu thought for a bit, then interjected, When I accidentally ran into the puppet's manners trap, I was met with a pair of human puppets, one female, the other male. There are many human puppet in this manner, but all of them are bareheaded, polished and made from the same mold. None of them are like that couple who were made with great details and resembled actual human beings. Senior Long, that pair of human puppets, were they you and your esteemed wife, or Rong Xian and his wife? Long K closed his eyes. Rong Xian and his wife, he responded after a long pause. Well, Zhou Zishu said softly, in the end, they cracked open each other's skull. Long Q's hand trembled almost unnoticeably at that. Ye Bai pressed on. Is it true that Rong Xian had a qi deviation? Long K nodded silently and said, indeed. Before Madame Rong died, he had already descended into insanity from qi deviation. Madame Rong died at his hands. End chapter. Faraway Wanderers. Chapter 51, The Past. Back then, Rong Xian and I, with a few others, were still in the vigor of youth. Full of ourselves, we gravitated towards each other as, I suppose, birds of a seedy feather were bound to do. Our little group often gathered to compare techniques and have wine together. Amongst us, Rong Xian was the most skilled, he was also the one with the sharpest mind. One day, after a few drinks, he was suddenly overcome with profound emotion. He declared that being born a man into this world, one had to accomplish something great. Else, wouldn't leading a mediocre life and passing away in obscurity be a terrible waste? Whether because of his weakened condition or because those stories were from such a long time ago that they required careful recollection, Long Quan spoke at an agonizingly slow pace, and with many pauses. Ye Bai's mood couldn't be deciphered from his impassive face. When Kexing, however, had quieted down for once and was listening with rapt attention. Rong Xian said that the world of martial arts was vast and profound and that each of the supreme techniques of the various great sects in the Jianghu had their strengths and shortcomings. Every few decades or centuries, a genius would appear in the pugilist world and they would become a grand master of their time and start their own clan. Huashan, Kunshan, Kangshan, and the rest had all been the same. Yet, their successors were often weak and did no more than woodenly imitate the teachings of their forebears. As each successive generation grows less and less capable than the one before, there will be a decline of the sect and there will be a death of the sect. Yet, each sect treasures their useless broomstick simply because it's their own. They hid their bit of gongfu at the bottom of the chest, away from the eyes of the others. After ages of doing so, innumerable divine skills and supreme techniques have been lost to time. Rong Xian felt that it was foolish to have these sects. At that point in the old man's narration, Ye Bai snorted. Those were originally my words, he said. The little brat did nothing but repeat them like a parrot. Anyone who takes pride in coming from a so-called sect is a useless rice tub. You don't even have to look at them to know it. They can only learn what's being taught to them, and they are only skilled in things they've learned. What difference, then, is there between them and the monkeys trained by street performers? As for supreme martial technique, weren't those created by men to begin with? To have your skull cracked in the struggle for a secret manual that someone else wrote, not only are you plagiarizing someone else's work entirely, you're also worshipping it as wisdom. Do you think that someone else has two brains, or do you feel that you didn't grow one? Upon hearing that, Zhou Zishu couldn't hold back a chuckle. Only for Ye Bai to glare at him. What are you laughing for? The man in white snapped. You're the very result of awful teachings from Qin Huajiang, that buffoon. Interrupted, Long K contemplated Ye Bai. Venerable elder, you are indeed an exceptional man, he said after a long while. With wisdom beyond mere mortal reckoning. Then he reprised his narration. As a result, Rong Xian came up with an idea. All of us agreed in secret that we would steal our respective clans' martial technique manual and gather them together in one place. We then built an armory within which we could study them comprehensively so as to create a technique that would combine all of technique's strengths. I devised the mechanism protecting the armory myself, the legendary lapis armor. Once its fragments were put together, an additional key was needed to open it. We divided the armor amongst ourselves for safekeeping and entrusted the key to Lady Wrong. Yabai interrupted him again. You said that you aimed to combine the strengths of all the clan's techniques? That was pure bullshit on Rongxian's part. In this world, benefits and drawbacks are interdependent. Could you ever combine the diamond palm with Imei's thorn strike? Can a burly and thick-set man squeeze into the skirt of a petite girl? It's a simple logic that even children could comprehend. If you can genuinely understand the true philosophy of martial arts, then you can even glean insights from the falling leaves and flowers, or the rise and fall of the tides. If you can't, then you could steal all the secret tomes under the heavens, and you'd still be no better than a mere copyist of books. Long Ke didn't reply, he merely gave a drawn-out sigh. Amongst the few of them present, although the others may have no concept of it, Zhou Zishu knew for a fact that, within Jianghu, to steal the ancestral manuals of one's clan or to reveal its techniques to outsiders was a capital crime. Hearing this, he now understood why hero Zhao Jin had been expelled from his clan all those years ago and could not help but ask, those few people you mentioned, were they the succeeding generation of elites of the 5 major clans back then, people such as Zhao Jing, Gao Chong, Shen Shen, and others of their generation, for example? It would certainly explain why Sir Gao kept his mouth shut tight about the lapis armor, why he had remained vague in his explanations till the end. Long Ke nodded and smiled bleakly. Indeed, it was. Laughably, at the time we thought of ourselves as groundbreakers who were transcending the limits of our clan's teachings. And what Rongxian presented us with was half of the 6 harmonies cultivation mantra. Unconsciously, the gaze of the other focused on Yi Bai. Zhou Zishu asked, Senior, what is the 6 harmonies cultivation mantra? Ye Bai frowned, and for once, he didn't take a self-important tone when he spoke. The 6 harmonies cultivation mantra is an ancient artifact of legend said to have been penned in antiquity. The original manuscript has in reality been lost. A friend of mine came upon a surviving, partial copy of it by chance. He spent 20 years reconstituting the missing parts to recreate a full tome. It was divided into 2 volumes, the upper and the lower scrolls. Rongxian stole the lower scroll, while the upper one remained in Changming Mountain back then. My friend, we destroyed it afterwards. From those words, Zhou Zishu gleaned 2 pieces of information. First, there was a second person residing in Changming Mountain who was of the same generation as Ye Bai and with whom the glutton was close. Second, that person had dared reconstitute the 6 harmonies cultivation mantra, which could only mean that they were an expert as well. Zhou Zishu arched his brow, recalling the time when Ye Bai had told him, have I ever said I was the ancient monk? He then thought, could that person be the true ancient monk of Changming Mountain? And then, if Ye Bai had left Changming Mountain on his own, claiming to act in the name of the ancient monk, was it because that other person was too indisposed to travel, or was it because he was already no longer part of this world? Those considerations danced across Zhou Zishu's mind and slipped away in a mere second as Long Ke reprised his narration. We all read half of the ancient tome Rongxian brought, but its content was really too profound and none of us could grasp it fully. In that period of time, as we thirst to crack its mysteries, we'd forsake sleep and food to scour for information in the vast sea of classical manuals. We hoped to find even the tiniest clue that would help explain that cultivation mantra. Its attraction was that strong. Rongxian said that if we had a complete grasp on the knowledge in that book, we would fully penetrate the mysteries of the universe and achieve oneness with it. That was a state of existence that had been passed down by legend since ancient time. Everyone was pursuing that level of lofty existence at the top of the world and no one could resist that sort of temptation. However, in this world, so-called shortcuts didn't exist. Just as how the rarest and most precious materials were always found in the most perilous places, the more powerful an object could make someone, the more strenuous would be the test it imposed upon their heart. The more profound the martial technique, the easier it was to Chi deviate. At that point in the old man's narration, even Ye Bai quieted down. Amongst us, Rong Xian was the one who progressed the furthest. He was also the one whose obsession ran deepest. He was almost fanatically besotted with that cultivation mantra. None of us noticed because at that time, we were also fanatically besotted, until one day, he declared that he had finally understood the fundamental theory of six harmonies cultivation mantra, which was to reforge after destruction, without terminations, the new cannot exist. Ye Bai was stunned. What? He muttered. Long Q's hand trembled. In fact, his entire body trembled. In the six harmonies cultivation mantra, there was a line that went at the most extreme point of one's journey, one can glean the secrets of the universe. What was this extreme point of one's journey? It could be ridding yourself of martial ability, it could be severing your own meridians, or it could even be ending your own life. At that, the oddest expression crept across Ye Bai's face. And that's what you all thought? He asked. Long K barely had time to nod before Ye Bai burst out into a fit of wall-shaking guffaws. Although even in laughter, the face of the man in white remained stiff. Not a single line crinkled the corner of his eyes as his facial muscles seemed to twitch preternaturally, lending him a vague air of sorrow instead of mirth. Ridding yourself of martial ability, severing you own meridians, ending you own life, ha ha ha, to think that you could come up with that. Woodenly, Long K related, at that time, we had all gone mad. Each of us had become increasingly impatient and hot-tempered, Rong Xian even more so. He said that to achieve something outstanding, we had to demonstrate outstanding courage. That we had to take paths no other had even dared contemplate. At the time, Yuzui was already pregnant. Even though that wicked book had affected me as well, I wasn't in so deep that I would abandon my wife and unborn child. And so I was the first one to back out. Since the endeavor was risky, they asked me to stay and assist them in the ritual. The old man sighed before he carried on. They sat down in a circle and chose a time, swearing that if they failed, they would have died for a higher purpose without regret. But then, to my surprise, when the hour came, everyone beside Rong Xian backed out at the last moment. As the saying goes, they all reined in their horse at the edge of the cliff, without even consulting each other first. What's surprising about that? Ye Bai said in an icy tone. Other people train in martial arts either for status or fame, or out of ambition for some achievement. It's never for the art itself, so they wouldn't want to take so much risk. Only Rong Xian, that ingrate, was truly obsessed with martial art. He severed his own heart meridian, Long K said with a nod. When he stopped breathing, a smile still lingered on his face. The rest of us waited without daring to breathe for heaven knows how long before we understood the truth at last, he had been wrong. It was like waking up from a long dream, and each of us, either standing or sitting, was dumbfounded as we remained gathered around him. Lady Rong wasn't skilled in martial arts, but she was from the Divine Medicine Valley and had rescued countless people from the clutches of death. She was naturally unwilling to let her own husband die just like that. She calmed herself down and retrieved 18 silver needles which she inserted into Rong Xian's torso. 6 hours went by while she persisted, preserving a bit of warmth in his chest, and to everyone's surprise, the weakest respiration animated him again. We all thought that he had resuscitated, but he couldn't be woken up. He was alive, yet in comatose. After that, Lady Rong bathed her face with tears for 3 days. In the end, she decided to return to the Divine Medicine Valley to steal the Yin-Yang manual. She didn't know martial arts, and the trip was a perilous one, so I accompanied her. Come to think of it, you could say that I'm the very person who brought that book into these lands. At that moment, Wen Kexing suddenly cast a look at Zhou's issue. He pursed his lips before he cut off Long Ke for the first time. That yin-yang manual you speak of, the guy asked, can it really save someone even if their heart meridian has been severed? Upon hearing that question, Zhou's issue gave a start. He looked up and just so happened to meet Wen Kexing's gaze. Suddenly, he felt a warmth in his chest. Unbelievably, Wen Kexing was still worrying on his behalf while the great shaman of Nanjiang himself had shaken his head and declared his injuries a hopeless case. Why bother doing so? At a loss, Zhou's issue reflected that they were to each other no more than strangers who had met by mere happenstance. No more than two wanderers on foreign shores who had ended up as traveling companions. So indeed, why would he bother? Could it be? Could it be that the man was actually sincere in his intentions? Not entirely of his own accord, Zhou's issue looked away, feeling as if Wen Kexing's gaze that lingered on him had a weight to it. A weight and a warmth. Long Ke gave an icy chuckle. Do you not know of the Healer's Valley's motto? He asked in reply to Wen Kexing's question. It aims to practice medicine to help the public. If a treatise on medicine in its possession was miraculous, don't you think that they'd use it instead of stashing it away? No. Upturning yin and yang is a mere paraphrase for grafting techniques. If you wish to repair someone's heart meridian, then you must take another heart that has been freshly dug out from the chest of a living person to replace it. You tell me, what kind of miracle is that? Madam Wrong, did she really? Zhou's issue asked. Long Ke remained silent for a long while before he exhaled a sigh. Attachment to loved ones is only human. She wasn't a saint, she was only a woman who had betrayed her own clan for her husband. As outsiders, it is not our place to pass judgment. So, Rong Xian lived, Ye Bai said. Yes, he did, Long Ke answered. He not only lived. I do not know if it was coincidence or if that mantra is genuinely that wicked, the true qi within his body experienced explosive growth. After experiencing death once, he had really grasped that half of the manual. Thus, before Madame Wrong could even cry on his shoulder in relief at regaining the person she had lost, he headed to cultivate in seclusion right away in order to restore the upper half of that book. Ingrate, Ye Bai commented. I have no detailed knowledge of what happened afterwards, Long Ke carried on. My wife was about to give birth and I focused on staying by her side. The birth was a perilous one, and the doctor barely managed to snatch my wife and child back from the gates of hell. But afterwards, it was as if her body was completely depleted of vitality. I stayed by her side night and day for half a year until, at last, even the doctor exhausted his skills. Finally, as he spoke, tears slid down from the corners of his eyes. He gave a slow shake of his head and said, I lost all hope. A friend of mine accompanied me on my return to look for them, as I intended to bid my farewells and part ways with them. But then, out of some unfathomable coincidence, as we entered the armory, we ran across Madame Wrong, who was grievously injured and near death. Rong Xian's sword was sticking out of her chest and Rong Xian's hands were entirely covered with blood. It was unclear whether he had recovered from having gone mad or had been struck dumb, but he only stood there, looking at her. My friend was so shocked that he unsheathed his sword and swung it at him. Thankfully, some remnant of humanity had come back to Rong Xian. He didn't try to fight and fled instead. By that point, the lapis armor was already lost. Before she died, Lady Rong gave the key to the armory to my friend, and we both swore on our lives that we would never reveal its whereabouts so that no one could open the armory ever again. As the old man finished speaking, the people in the room fell into a hush. It was a while later that Zhou's issue broke the silence again. So, is that when Rong Xian became mad and went on a rampage? He asked. After which he was hunted down until he had to seek refuge at the Ghost Valley, where he was besieged and killed. Long Ke let out a sigh and said, by that time I had already returned to the puppet's manor and no longer paid attention to the affairs of this world. I can only assume that's how things went. More or less. A death well deserved, yeah, Bai said, closing his eyes. The bluish veins on the back of the glutton's hands bulged as he clutched the hilt of the Bai sword. He squeezed so hard, the hilt turned into fine powder between his fingers and the sword's edge cut into his palm. The blade hit the ground with a clang as he let go, though the man in white still acted as if he had noticed nothing. Eructing each word, he only repeated the sentence, a death, well deserved. With that, he turned and left without bidding anyone goodbye. His figure flashed and then he was gone without a trace. All that time that Zhang Chengling had been listening, he had only grasped some parts of what had been said and had not understood the rest. He looked up and scrutinized his remaining two companions. They seemed resolute in keeping silent. Thus, plucking up his courage, he addressed the old man. "Grandpa, what's going to happen to you?" he asked. Long K mulled it over for a while before he probed around with his hand, until he caught the corner of Josish's robe. "Young man, do a good deed, will you?" he said. "Take that sword of yours and grant me a quick and clean death. Long Xiao, that little bastard, wouldn't let me die. Now that he's gone to see the king of hell, I can also go down there as well and settle my debts with him." Before Josisha could reply, Wen Kexing had already come over. Bending down, he carefully helped Long K sit upright. Then, he placed his palm over the old man's chest and spoke in a solemn and respectful tone that was seldom heard from him, "I can shatter your meridians in a mere second. It will be a quick and clean end. Senior, consider it carefully." Long K laughed. I have. You're only doing a charity. Please, go on." The last syllable of the word ahead was still forming on the old man's lips when Wen Kexing issued a burst of force through his lightly affixed fingers. Suspended in laughter, Long Q's entire body jolted once, and the mirth of his last laugh was forever etched on his features. "Grandpa!" Zhang Chengling exclaimed, in utter disbelief of what had occurred. Wen Kexing reached out to close Long Q's eyes before he laid the old man down in the bed. Then, he hugged Zhang Chengling to him. "We shouldn't humiliate him any further," he said, patting the boy on the head. "He was a hero, and should have a hero's death." After a pause, he turned to Josishu and told him, "I'd like to stay here for some time, to give him a proper send-off." Josishu got up to his feet, using the bedpost for support. "All right," he replied as he made for the door. But before he could step outside, Wen Kexing called out to him again. "Asu, you two should stay with me, so that you can recover from your injury." Josishu snorted. "If I can recover from one wound, can I recover from the other? Since I can't recuperate from it, I should seize the day and eat, drink and make merry to my heart's content. It's more worth it that way." Wen Kexing lowered his eyes and gave a small chuckle. When he spoke again his voice was soft. "Then, would you consider," he asked, "staying a few days to keep me company?" Josisha paused and remained silent for a good while before he finally said, "Sure." End chapter.